They thought they were stopping a passenger, but they were really stopping the truth. The boarding call for Flight 278 to Chicago had barely finished echoing through Terminal C when the entire gate seemed to tighten around Naomi Carter like a fist. One moment, she was standing in line with her carry-on resting beside her polished black heels, her phone screen dim in her hand, her expression calm beneath the cold white wash of airport lighting. The next, two airport police officers stepped directly into her path with the kind of confidence that assumed obedience before a single word was spoken. Around them, the rhythm of the terminal kept moving, but only barely. Rolling suitcases clicked over tile. A toddler cried near the newsstand. Somewhere above, another gate announced a delay no one wanted to hear. But here at Gate 14, the air changed. "Ma'am, step out of line," Officer Derek Shaw said, his voice flat and public, loud enough to make nearby passengers turn their heads. Naomi looked up slowly, not startled, not flustered, just measuring him with a silence that somehow made his badge seem smaller. She was 38, dressed in a navy blazer and cream blouse, the kind of woman who carried herself like she had spent her life learning how not to break in rooms built to bend people. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone even, almost gentle. Shaw did not answer right away. That was the first thing people noticed. He looked at her boarding pass, then at her face, then at the small leather bag by her feet, as if suspicion itself were a form of evidence. Beside him, Officer Melissa Grant crossed her arms and scanned Naomi from head to toe with the thin impatience of someone who had already made up her mind. "We need you to come with us," Grant said. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others stared with the quiet fascination people reserve for someone else's humiliation. Naomi did not move. "On what grounds?" she asked. Her voice stayed low, but there was steel in it now, the kind that slips under a sentence without raising its volume. Shaw glanced toward the gate desk, where the airline agent suddenly found something urgent to do with her. "Computer, you matched a security concern," he said. "We'll explain once you step aside." Naomi's eyes flicked, just once, toward the row of dome cameras mounted above the boarding lane, then back to him. It was such a small movement no one else would have noticed, but somehow it made the moment feel less random, less simple than it looked. "I have a valid boarding pass, a federal ID, and a checked bag that's already in your system," she said. "So I'll ask again. On what grounds?" That was when the line behind her began to unravel into whispers. A man in a ball cap leaned toward his wife. A college kid pulled one earbud out. A little girl holding a stuffed rabbit looked up at her mother and asked, far too clearly, "Why are they taking that lady?" No one answered. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Naomi could feel every eye settling onto her, not with concern but with curiosity, as if public doubt had become part of the airport decor. Shaw stepped closer. "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Naomi held his gaze, unblinking. "That depends," she said softly. "Hard for who?" For a moment, no one moved. The line to board Flight 278 stood frozen beneath the bright gate monitors, and the silence that settled over Gate 14 felt heavier than noise. Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her carry-on, her shoulders straight, her breathing steady. She did not look like someone causing a disturbance. She looked like someone being measured by a system that had already decided what it wanted to see. Officer Derek Shaw seemed to sense the eyes gathering around him, and his posture sharpened under the attention. In airports, authority often wore the same face no matter what it was doing. It did not need to explain itself. It only needed to sound certain. "Step away from the boarding lane now," he said, firmer this time. Naomi glanced past him toward the jet bridge entrance, then toward the gate screen glowing with the words "Final Boarding." Her expression did not change. "If I step away," she said, "my flight leaves. So I am going to need something more specific than vague language and a badge." A few people nearby looked down at their phones, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. A businessman in a gray quarter zip shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. An elderly woman seated near the window tightened her mouth and watched with the stillness of someone who had seen this kind of scene before and already knew how it usually ended. Officer Melissa Grant took half a step forward. "You are delaying an active security procedure," she said. "Do not make this into something it does not need to be." Naomi turned her head toward Grant with calm precision. "That depends on whether this is really about security," she replied. The sentence landed quietly, but it changed the temperature around them. Grant's jaw tightened. Shaw reached for Naomi's carry-on, and Naomi's hand stayed on it. Not pulling, not resisting, just present. That bag stays with me, she said. Not until we clear this up, Shaw answered. Naomi's gaze lifted again, not to him this time, but to the camera above the gate desk, then to the digital clock mounted beside the departure board. 6:42 in the evening. Terminal C, Gate 14. It was the kind of glance that might have looked meaningless to anyone else, but there was intention in it, a quiet cataloging of details. The gate agent, a young man named Trevor according to the badge clipped to his vest, cleared his throat and looked between them. "Officer, boarding is closing in less than 3 minutes," he said cautiously. Shaw did not look at him. "Then it closes." Naomi finally let go of her suitcase handle and reached into the inside pocket of her blazer with slow, deliberate care. Grant straightened instantly. Several passengers leaned back as if tension itself had weight. But Naomi only pulled out a slim leather card holder and held it between 2 fingers. "Before this goes any further," she said, "I want both of your names, badge numbers, and the name of the supervisor on duty for this terminal." Shaw gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think you are in a position to demand anything?" Naomi looked him dead in the eye, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than before, which somehow made it stronger. "No," she said. "I think you have not realized what position you are already in." Something flickered behind Derek Shaw's eyes then, not fear exactly, but irritation sharpened by uncertainty. Men like him were used to reading hesitation in other people, used to watching voices lower and shoulders fold the moment a uniform entered the frame. Naomi Carter gave him none of that. She stood under the sterile glow of Terminal C as if the whole airport had narrowed to a single test of patience, and she had already decided she would not fail it. Around them, the gate area remained suspended in that strange public stillness where everyone pretended to be uninvolved while quietly choosing sides. Trevor at the desk glanced again at the clock. 6:43. The final boarding tone chimed once more, softer this time, like a door beginning to close. "Supervisor's name is Martin Bennett," Grant said at last, her voice clipped. "Why?" Naomi slid the leather card holder back into her blazer pocket without opening it. "Because if this continues another 60 seconds without cause, he is going to want his name attached to it from the beginning." Grant let out a small breath through her nose, almost a laugh, but there was no amusement in it. Derek shifted his weight and reached to his shoulder radio. "Unit 12 to Terminal C Supervisor. Immediate response requested at Gate 14. The radio crackled back with static and then a voice too muffled to understand. Naomi listened carefully, not like a traveler overhearing airport chatter, but like someone sorting signal from noise. Her eyes moved once more over the gate area, lingering on the overhead camera, then on the emergency exit beyond the seating row, then on the reflective glass wall facing the tarmac, where the last orange wash of sunset had faded into the hard blue of evening. Outside, ground crews moved between aircraft in fluorescent vests, tiny figures in a machine that never stopped for anyone. Inside, time felt slower. "Open the bag," Derek said. Naomi looked at him, and for the first time something almost like disappointment passed through her expression. "You are still asking the wrong question," she said. "The question is not what is in my bag. The question is who told you to stop me before boarding." A low murmur moved through the nearest passengers. Derek's face hardened. "No one told us anything. You were flagged." Naomi tilted her head just slightly. "By whom?" He did not answer. She already knew he could not. That was the problem with lazy authority. It depended on people accepting vague words as legitimate process. But vague words sounded thinner the longer they hung in the air. An older man near the window finally spoke, his voice careful but audible. "If she has identification, why not just verify it?" Derek shot him a look that shut him up instantly, and the silence that followed revealed more than any explanation could have. Naomi noticed every reaction. The mother with the little girl now held her daughter closer. The businessman in the quarter zip had stepped back, suddenly eager to be nowhere near the center of things. Trevor kept glancing between Naomi and the terminal hallway, waiting for the supervisor who still had not arrived. Then Naomi's phone vibrated once in her hand. The screen lit up with a single banner notification before dimming again. She read it in less than a second, But something in her posture changed, not dramatically, just enough to sharpen her focus. Derek noticed. "Hand me the phone," he said. Naomi closed her fingers around it. "No," the word was quiet. "Absolute." Grant stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate, this becomes a larger issue." Naomi's gaze moved to her with cool precision. "No," she said again. It becomes a clearer one. A beat passed. Then footsteps echoed from the terminal corridor, brisk and official. Martin Bennett appeared at last, tall, broad-shouldered, his airport security blazer slightly open from hurrying, his expression already arranged in the tight neutrality of a man who knew he was walking into trouble. He looked first at Derek, then Grant, then at Naomi. And in that single instant, before anyone spoke, Naomi saw it. Recognition. Small, quickly buried. But there. The kind that changed everything. Martin Bennett slowed as he reached the gate, but only for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Naomi Carter to confirm what she had already sensed. He knew who she was. Or at the very least, he knew enough to understand that this scene had crossed a line it was never supposed to reach in public. Still, when he came to a stop beside Officer Derek Shaw, his expression settled into the polished restraint of a man more loyal to procedure than to truth. "What is going on here?" he asked, scanning the scene as though he had arrived blind to it, as though the tension hanging over Gate 14 had not already announced itself to half the terminal. Derek answered first, eager now, his voice sharpened by the presence of a superior. "Possible security concern during final boarding." Subject became uncooperative when asked to step aside for screening. Naomi did not miss the word subject. In places like this, language was the first hand that reached for your dignity. Martin turned to her. "Ma'am, I am Martin Bennett, Terminal Security Supervisor. If there has been a misunderstanding, we can resolve it quickly if you cooperate." Naomi met his gaze with the same calm she had worn from the beginning, but now there was something cooler beneath it, something watchful. "A misunderstanding would require uncertainty," she said. "What I am seeing looks much more deliberate than that." Martin's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. The nearby passengers leaned in without moving, drawn by the quiet force of her voice. Even the boarding agent had stopped pretending to work. The monitor above the desk still flashed final boarding, but nobody at that gate was thinking about Chicago anymore. Martin lowered his tone. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation away from the crowd." Naomi glanced at the line of travelers, at the little girl holding the stuffed rabbit, at the older woman by the window, at the young airline employee staring as if he had just realized airports were not neutral places after all. Then she looked back at Martin. "No," she said. "This started in public. It stays in public." The sentence landed harder than any raised voice could have. Derek folded his arms. "Supervisor, she is refusing a lawful request." Naomi answered before Martin could. "Then say the request clearly. State the cause. State who initiated it. State what policy you are acting under." Derek opened his mouth, but nothing immediate came out. That hesitation was small, but in a room built on control, small hesitations mattered. Martin stepped in quickly, too quickly. There was a report from gate personnel about suspicious conduct. Naomi's eyes moved to Trevor, the gate agent. Trevor blinked, startled, then looked down so fast it was almost painful to watch. Naomi saw it. Martin saw that she saw it. Grant saw it too, and the whole scene tilted slightly further off balance. "Interesting," Naomi said softly. "Because your gate agent has not said more than 12 words since this started." Martin's face tightened. "We do not need to debate this in front of travelers." Naomi's phone vibrated again inside her hand, and this time she did not look at the screen. She just held it, as if the timing itself told her enough. "No," she said. "You do not want to debate it in front of travelers." A hush swept through the gate. Outside the glass, a tug vehicle rolled past beneath the wing of the aircraft waiting at the jet bridge, its lights blinking across the darkening tarmac. Inside, the fluorescent ceiling cast everyone in the same pale wash, but authorities still found ways to sort people into categories. Passenger, officer, supervisor, problem. Naomi stood there knowing exactly which role they had assigned her, and exactly how close they were to regretting it. Martin took one measured breath, then extended his hand. "Ma'am, give me your phone and your identification. Let us settle this before it becomes more complicated." Naomi looked at his outstretched hand for a long second, then lifted her eyes back to his. It already is complicated, she said. You just still think you control which part comes next. Martin Bennett kept his hand extended for another second, maybe two, then slowly let it fall back to his side when Naomi Carter made no move to give him anything. That tiny retreat did not look like much, but everyone at Gate 14 felt it. Power had shifted, not completely, not yet, but enough to make the air seem thinner. Derek Shaw looked from Martin to Naomi and back again, waiting for a firmer command, something that would restore the clean order of uniform above traveler, accusation above explanation. Instead, Martin adjusted the cuff of his blazer and spoke with a care that felt newly calculated. Miss Carter, this does not have to become a formal incident. Naomi's gaze sharpened at the name. He had not asked for identification. He had not checked a boarding pass. Yet somehow he knew exactly who she was. The realization moved through her like a cold current, not because it surprised her, but because it confirmed what she had been tracking for weeks. People in this airport were making decisions before facts arrived. The system was not reacting. It was selecting. That is interesting, she said quietly. You seem very comfortable using my name for someone who claims this is still routine. Martin's expression barely changed, but the pulse in his neck gave him away. Grant looked at him now with the first hint of uncertainty, as if even she had begun to notice that the script was slipping. Derek, still stubborn, still riding the momentum of his badge, gestured toward Naomi's carry-on. Supervisor, we should clear the bag and move her to secondary screening. Naomi turned to him. You have said bag 6 times, she replied. You have not once said what you think is actually in it. Derek did not answer. He did not have to. Men like him often trusted implication more than evidence. It was easier that way. Easier to let the crowd fill in the blank with whatever fear they had been taught to believe. Naomi let the silence stretch just long enough for that truth to settle. Then she looked past Derek to the security podium near the terminal corridor. Mounted beside it was a monitor showing rotating camera feeds from across the concourse. One frame flashed Gate 14 from above. Another showed the main hall near the escalators. A third displayed the boarding lane from an angle that caught only shoulders and luggage. Naomi had memorized those camera placements 3 days ago. She had also memorized which ones skipped every 6 seconds when the archive buffer lagged. Her eyes moved to the right side of Martin Bennett's beltline, where a clipped access key hung beside his radio, then to the silver ring on his left hand, then to the pin on his lapel from the airport's Customer Dignity Initiative, a polished little emblem that looked almost absurd now. You are watching the wrong thing, Martin said, attempting to reclaim the moment. Naomi gave him a long look. No, she said. I am watching exactly the right things. Behind her, the final boarding door tone sounded once, then stopped. Trevor glanced helplessly at the aircraft door, then back at Martin. Sir, he said softly, if we do not close in the next minute, operations is going to call. Martin did not turn. Then let them call. That answer hit Naomi harder than anything else had so far, because it told her this was no longer about a traveler delaying a flight. They were willing to hold a departure over her, create paperwork, trigger review, draw attention from operations. No supervisor did that for a vague concern unless the concern had been seated higher up or earlier than anyone wanted to admit. Her phone vibrated once more, this time with a longer pulse. She looked at the screen at last. One short message. 3 words. Preserve Gate 14. Naomi locked the screen again and slipped the phone into her palm. When she lifted her eyes, they were calmer than before, and somehow that calm carried a warning sharper than anger. You have one chance, she said to Martin, her voice low enough that people leaned in to hear it. Tell your officers to step back, preserve every recording from this gate, and stop pretending this began with me. No one spoke. Even the terminal noise seemed farther away now, as if the rest of the airport had drifted to the other side of a glass wall. Martin stared at her, and for the first time since he arrived, he looked less like a supervisor managing a disruption and more like a man standing at the edge of a mistake he could no longer contain. Martin Bennett did not answer right away, and in that pause Naomi Carter felt the last fragile disguise of the moment begin to crack. It was not just that he was hesitating. It was what the hesitation meant. Men in control of ordinary situations did not go silent when given a simple instruction. Preserve the recordings. Step back the officers. Clarify the cause. Those were not impossible requests. They were only dangerous ones if the truth had already started moving beneath the surface. Naomi stood still with her phone warm against her palm and let the silence work for her. Around them, Gate 14 had become something more than a boarding area. It was now a stage built by fluorescent light, polished tile, and public witness, the exact kind of place where systems forgot how visible they were until it was too late. The little girl with the stuffed rabbit had stopped asking questions, but her wide eyes remained fixed on Naomi as if she sensed that what was happening here was bigger than one delayed flight. Trevor at the desk kept swallowing hard, his fingers frozen above the keyboard. Even Officer Melissa Grant had started looking less certain, her posture no longer rigid with confidence, but held together by habit alone. Derek Shaw, however, was still clinging to authority like it was the same thing as being right. "Supervisor," he said, his voice tight, "we cannot just back off because she wants to sound important." Naomi turned her head toward him slowly. "Important is what you call power when you do not know where it sits," she said. Derek scoffed, but the sound came out thinner than before. Naomi could see the moment pressing on all of them now, and in that pressure her mind flashed backward, not to years ago, but to earlier that very morning, when the airport had still felt like a machine she could study from inside, without becoming part of its story. She had arrived just after 9, carrying the same leather bag, wearing the same composed expression that made people underestimate her in one glance and resent her in the next. For 11 days she had been moving through terminals, food courts, gate lounges, employee corridors, and arrival halls under a quiet assignment from an independent transportation oversight unit contracted through the State Inspector General's office. The official language was dry, almost lifeless: pattern review, procedural integrity, traveler treatment analysis. But the real purpose had been clear from the beginning. Too many complaints had disappeared. Too many reports had been filed and redirected. Too many black travelers had described the same cold sequence in different words: selected, delayed, questioned, watched, and quietly humiliated while everyone else kept moving. Naomi had not come to the airport to chase drama. She had come because she understood how institutions learn to hide inside routine. The truth was rarely loud at first. It usually wore the face of policy, smiled through customer service language, and let other people call the harm a misunderstanding. By noon she had logged 3 incidents that matched the pattern. By 3 o'clock she had watched a teenage boy pulled from a security line for an extra screening that seemed based on nothing but a glance. By 5 she had reason to believe someone inside terminal operations was tipping officers toward specific travelers before boarding. That was why she had stayed for the Chicago flight. That was why she had positioned herself at Gate 14. Not because she knew exactly what would happen, but because she had learned to trust the shape of a pattern before the pattern revealed its full face. And now, standing under the pale lights with Derek Shaw waiting for permission, Martin Bennett calculating risk, and a full gate of strangers holding their breath, Naomi understood something with perfect clarity. The airport had not interrupted her investigation. It had just completed it. She lifted her chin slightly and looked at Martin as though the last several minutes had only been the opening move. "You were given a choice," she said, her voice calm enough to chill the air around it. "Now you are being given a record." The words hung in the air so cleanly that for a second even the terminal seemed to lose its sound. A record. Not an argument. Not a warning. A record. Martin Bennett stared at Naomi Carter as though he were trying to calculate how much damage had already been done and whether any of it could still be folded back into procedure, buried under reports, softened by language, delayed by meetings and signatures, and polite internal phrasing. But some moments do not return to paper once the truth has stepped into the room. Some moments belong to witnesses. Derek Shaw did not understand that yet. Or perhaps he did, and simply refused to accept it. "Enough," he said, stepping forward with the brittle confidence of a man who had spent too long mistaking compliance for proof. "Supervisor, we are done entertaining this. She has delayed boarding, refused instructions, and interfered with security operations. I am taking possession of her phone and bag now." Naomi did not flinch. She only looked at him with the kind of stillness that made his urgency seem smaller. "No," she said. "You are not." Derek reached toward her again, and Martin finally spoke, his voice sharper than before. "Stand down, officer." It was the first clear command anyone had given since the confrontation began, and it landed with enough force to stop the movement dead. Derek turned, stunned. "Sir." Martin did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi, on the phone in her hand, on the composure that no frightened passenger should have had after being cornered at a gate by armed authority. "Stand down," he repeated. The murmurs around Gate 14 returned in a low, wavering tide. People shifted. Someone exhaled too loudly. Trevor's mouth fell open for half a second before he caught himself. Naomi could feel the balance tipping now, not because justice had arrived, but because control was slipping and everyone could see it. She lifted her phone at last, not high, not dramatically, just enough to wake the screen. Then she pressed one number and placed the call on speaker. It rang once, twice. A woman answered immediately, her tone brisk and official. "Reeves." Naomi's voice remained calm. "This is Carter. Preserve all recordings from Terminal C, Gate 14, starting at 6:36 p.m. Include gate audio, officer radio traffic, podium feeds, and dispatch logs. My investigation is now active." The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that empties a room of assumptions all at once. Across from her, Grant's face drained of color. Derek looked from Naomi to Martin as if the floor beneath him had shifted without warning. Trevor whispered, "Investigation?" before catching himself. The voice on the speaker did not hesitate. "Understood. State status." Naomi kept her eyes on Martin. "Subject interference confirmed. Supervisor present. Public witness field extensive. Recommend immediate chain preservation and restricted access to local reporting." Caroline Reeves answered with the calm of someone used to entering rooms after the lie had already been told. "Confirmed. Do not surrender your device. Do not relocate without documentation. I am notifying State Oversight and Airport Executive Council now." Naomi ended the call and let the phone rest in her hand. No one moved. Even the aircraft outside seemed frozen beneath the jet bridge lights. Martin closed his eyes for the briefest second, and when he opened them, whatever doubt he had been nursing was gone. It had been replaced by something heavier. Recognition, yes, but also consequence. Derek found his voice first, though it came out rough and uncertain. "What exactly is this?" Naomi turned to him fully, and when she answered, every word was measured, clean, impossible to mistake. "For 11 days, I have been conducting an independent oversight investigation into traveler targeting, selective gate interference, and discriminatory enforcement patterns at this airport. Tonight, at Gate 14, you decided to make yourselves part of the evidence." No one around her looked away now. The mother with the little girl held her daughter close and stared at Derek as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The older woman by the window gave one slow, almost sorrowful shake of her head. Martin finally spoke, but the smoothness was gone from his tone. "Miss Carter, had I known." Naomi cut him off with a glance alone. "You did know enough," she said. "That is why you were afraid to name it." The truth did not arrive with sirens or raised voices. It arrived the way real consequences often do, in silence first, then in procedure. For a long moment after Naomi Carter spoke, no one at Gate 14 seemed to remember how to move. Derek Shaw stood with his shoulders still squared, but the certainty had gone out of him. Melissa Grant looked down at her own hands, as if she no longer knew what role they played in this scene. Martin Bennett remained fixed in place, caught between the instinct to manage optics and the dawning realization that optics had already failed him. Above them, the departure screen still glowed in airport blue, but the gate no longer belonged to the schedule. It belonged to the record now. Naomi lowered her phone and slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer with deliberate calm. She did not rush. She did not gloat. That was what unsettled them most. She had no need to raise herself over them because the system they had leaned on was already beginning to turn in her direction. From the terminal corridor came the quick sound of approaching footsteps. Then two more airport officials appeared beside the security podium, both wearing dark executive badges instead of field uniforms. One carried a tablet. The other held a sealed evidence envelope and a printed chain preservation form. They did not look at Naomi first. They looked at Martin. "Supervisor Bennett," the woman with the tablet said, her voice clipped and formal. "By order of Executive Council and State Oversight Liaison, all local incident reporting is suspended pending review. No one edits, deletes, or supplements logs from this gate. All recordings are to be preserved immediately. The words fell like steel into water. No drama. No shouting. Just authority changing hands. Derek blinked hard. "This is insane," he said. We responded to a concern. The official turned to him with a level stare that stripped the sentence of all shelter. "Then your response will be reviewed." That was the moment the crowd fully understood. The mother with the little girl looked down at her daughter, then back at Naomi, and her face changed from confusion to something closer to respect. The older woman by the window gave a single quiet nod. Trevor, still standing at the gate desk, slowly removed his hands from the keyboard, as if even touching the system now felt dangerous. Martin swallowed and drew himself up, trying to reclaim some peace of command. "We can handle this internally," he said. "No," Naomi answered before the officials could. That is how it lasted this long. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the fluorescent air with perfect clarity. The official with the envelope stepped toward Derek and Grant. "Both of you will surrender body camera access keys, radio units, and written notes pending review." Grant complied first. Her hands moved stiffly, her face pale beneath the terminal lights. Derek hesitated. "You are suspending us over one complaint." Naomi held his gaze as the woman took Grant's equipment. "No," she said. "Over a pattern." The words seemed to land harder than anything else. Because that was what men like Derek feared most. Not being wrong once, but being revealed as consistent. The tablet official turned to Trevor next. "Gate audio." Trevor nodded quickly. "Recorded through the desk line and overhead pickup." "Preserve it." "Yes, ma'am." Martin finally looked at Naomi not as a passenger, not as a problem, not even as an investigator, but as the person who had just made the airport answer to itself in public. There was regret in his face now, but not the kind that heals anything. The kind that comes when a man realizes the machine he trusted has no cover left to offer him. Naomi picked up the handle of her carry-on at last. Around her, the same people who had watched in silence now stepped aside without being asked. No one stared at her like a suspect anymore. They stared at the officers, at the supervisor, at the uniforms that had sounded so sure only minutes before. And in that slow, irreversible turn, the gate became what it should have been all along. Not a place where power decided who belonged, but a place where truth had finally been witnessed. Naomi Carter lifted her carry-on, and for the first time that night the movement felt ordinary, almost quiet, as if the airport itself had finally remembered what it was supposed to be. Around Gate 14, the tension had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed down on her. It settled instead over the people who had mistaken authority for immunity. Derek Shaw stood several feet away while one of the executive officials documented the surrender of his radio and access key. Melissa Grant remained silent, her face drawn tight with the knowledge that every choice made in the last 15 minutes now belonged to a chain of custody, a review board, and a public memory wider than either officer had expected. Martin Bennett had stepped back from the center of the gate, but there was nowhere for him to go that did not leave him standing inside the consequences of his own hesitation. Trevor cleared his throat from behind the desk, glanced at the boarding screen, then looked to Naomi with a care that had not been there before. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the aircraft door is still open. If you would still like to board, the crew has been notified." Naomi studied him for a moment, not because she doubted him, but because she could see the difference in him now. He was no longer looking at her through the lens the others had offered him. He was looking at her as a person, and in places built on hierarchy, that shift mattered more than most people ever admitted. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, warm enough to remind everyone listening that dignity did not have to be loud to be undeniable. As she stepped toward the boarding lane, the mother with the little girl moved aside first. The child clutched her stuffed rabbit and looked up at Naomi with wide, searching eyes. Naomi paused just long enough to offer her a small, reassuring smile, the kind that said more than comfort alone. It said that silence is not the same thing as weakness, and that calm can carry a kind of power no uniform can imitate. The older woman near the window gave Naomi a nod as she passed, slow and full of meaning, and Naomi returned it with one of her own. Behind her, the officials continued their work. Names were written down. Times were confirmed. Cameras were referenced by angle and feed number. No one needed drama anymore. The truth had already done what drama could not. It had made the right people visible. At the entrance to the jet bridge, Naomi stopped and turned back one final time. The terminal lights washed everything in the same pale color, yet the differences between people had never looked sharper. There stood the officers who had treated suspicion like fact. There stood the supervisor who had hoped procedure might save him from courage. There stood the witnesses who had seen how quickly a public place could become a courtroom when conscience finally opened its eyes. Derek looked at her then, his expression no longer hard, only hollowed out by disbelief. Naomi held his gaze for one measured second and spoke the only words that still needed to be said. The badge was never the problem, she said. It was the belief that some people do not belong wherever power is watching. No one answered. No one could. She turned and walked down the jet bridge with her shoulders straight and her steps unhurried, disappearing into the soft hum of the aircraft beyond. Behind her, Gate 14 remained bright, exposed, and unforgettable. And long after the plane pushed back from the terminal, long after reports were filed and footage reviewed and titles reconsidered, one truth stayed behind in that cold white light, like an echo too honest to erase. He thought he was stopping a passenger. But that night, he had stopped the truth just long enough for everyone to see who he really was.